Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the introduction. I am Roger Boland from Janet, and for the purposes of today, I'm also Henry Hughes from Janet, who unfortunately can't be here. So the tricky parts of the presentation, the awkward questions, I'll be Henry, and for the nice parts, I'll be me. I think that's fair. Just on John's presentation, actually, I had to deal with a voice-based parking system last night, and I would say it classed me as being a low-end voice user because at 7 o'clock this morning I had to go and buy a physical ticket, so it didn't work. I don't know where I was from, but it certainly didn't work. So I'm going to talk today about the Janet telephony purchasing service. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, hopefully. I'm going to talk about quality of service. I know this has been a bit of how should I put this, an interesting topic on the telecoms managers list, and I know that from a telephony perspective there's certainly a need for quality of service, so I'm going to touch on that. And we're going to talk a little bit about the futures at Janet, what we're looking at in terms of unified communication, so from voice, telephony, video conferencing, all of that lovely stuff. Marketing strapline, please ignore. Okay, so I'm going to start the presentation by a show of hands, and I'm really hoping I'm going to get a good show of hands here. So how many people here have heard of SIP? Oh, that's great. I normally give this presentation, and once I've had one person put their hand up, and so I just talked about this slide for half an hour. So I won't bore you with this slide. I'm going to touch on SIP because that's at the heart of essentially what we're doing at Janet at the moment. It's all just about replacing your current ISDN estate using your Janet IP connection and SIP trunks with ISDN providers. So you're just moving from that model to that model, and apologies for the terrible drawing. Art isn't one of my fortes. So background to what Janet's been doing, and essentially to lead into what I'm going to talk about in this presentation. We have, for the last, about 2 years ago now, we did some customer requirements gathering work, and we realised lots of things about telephony. Mainly that we weren't doing anything and customers were, and the commercial market was, and really we need to start looking at how Janet can best meet customer needs in this area. So we looked at lots of possible different solutions, and we came up with a technical and procurement solution for this. So we didn't just do what we normally do, buy loads of cool stuff, stick it in the network, connect it up, put a management service wrap around that, and offer it as a service. We looked more intelligently, hopefully, at how we can meet the needs for telephony, because we are an IP provider, we're not a telco, so there's stuff that we can and that we can't do because of that. But I'll touch on those throughout my presentation. So really there were providers selling services to Janet customers using Janet for actual telephony, so using SIP trunks, taking their ISDN traffic and routing it over the network. And we got to the situation whereby customers were asking us if they could do something through us. We were getting fingers pointed at us by providers because things weren't working, and therefore it must be Janet's fault. So really we thought we're going to have to take both sectors here, the supply market and the customer market, and look at how we can bridge those, the gap, and how Janet can get involved to make sure that we protect the brand of Janet, but ultimately give customers the best possible experience in this area. So as part of the customer requirements gathering, what do customers want? Ultimately everything that I'm going to talk about today boils down to cost reduction. So nobody wants to do SIP trunking because it's cool, because it's not. It's just a new way of doing telephony, a different way of doing telephony. The reason that customers want to do this 99% of the time is because of cost. And people say other things like it's flexible, and I can have more lines for a short period of time during, for example, clearing, and that's great. But the reason they want those lines for a short period of time is because they don't want to rent ISDN circuits all year round, just for sort of a month or 6 weeks use. So ultimately the reason customers are looking to move their telephony traffic onto an IP network, onto Janet, is all to do with cost. So they want to move commodity telephony traffic onto Janet. There are a number of slightly bespoke needs of the Janet community, but for all intents and purposes we're just SMEs, in some case larger than that. Customers wanted solutions for mobile not spots. We're going to touch on that. And in one of the presentations this morning we talked about software clients and how it was a commentary one and how that hadn't been rolled out. The information that we received is that really, and we look at Janet internally, we're about the size of an FE college roughly in terms of the sort of tech provision that we provide internally. Nobody wants a software client. Everybody wants, or if they do, they also want their phone on their desk. So in some cases, and I have done this, I put a phone on someone's desk and not plugged it in, and they've used a software client, but they've been happy that the phone's there, and it's fine. I'm not going to tell you who that was, but let's just say he isn't here today. Right. Customers want flexibility too. So, again, the flexibility is ultimately about saving money, because you can do what you do with IP telephony with traditional telephony, but it costs a lot of money. So the three areas that customers want to save money in, breaking it down, what does this cost saving actually mean? It's line rental. It's calling your own landlines and to your own mobiles, making those calls. I, for example, have my phone on forward all of the time to my mobile. And that's a big cost to an organisation where you haven't necessarily intelligently procured a solution, and you're just using a sort of bog standard call package. That can be a very expensive element. And we all have support people that we need to ring on a sort of daily basis. Those people have mobiles, and traditionally they're using a GSM network to contact them, so you're incurring a quite large mobile bill to call your own mobile. So that area, in some cases it was up to 80% of the bill was calling mobiles from landlines, but as we know, it depends on what package you have as to what proportion of your bill that would be. So that was a sort of bit of a one-off at 80%, but it's 20, 30, 40%, it's a reasonable chunk. The other bit of feedback we got from the community was that there are a number of other procurement solutions out there which are great, the PSNs and the GPS that was talked about this morning, the sort of the cabin office solutions out there. They meet a need, they exist, and they're very good. But in some cases, our customers want to buy a one-off, a complete telephony solution, including things like landline minutes, SIP trunks, mobile handsets, mobile contracts, PBXs in the cloud. I'm just plucking things out of my brain here. A whole range of stuff that people want to buy, and they want to buy that based on a need, and that need could be, for a small FE college, for example, they have 100 members of staff and they want an entire telephony solution. They don't want to go and have to prescribe to the supplier and tell them exactly what they want to buy. They don't necessarily have the intelligence or the inclination to sit down and work out the best technical solution for them. They have a business need. Let's let the market essentially meet that need and tell us what solutions are out there. So what we've done hopefully sort of meets that need. You don't need to go out necessarily and know what you're going to buy. You just need to know that you have a business need. Let the suppliers do the legwork. So we sat down at Janet and decided what we're going to do. We considered all of these things, and in fact on a daily basis I consider all of these again, and I personally think I would like to head down the route of a sort of telecoms and mobile operator, but we're a way off from doing that, and that's just my own personal little thing. I get in my soapbox and talk about it way too much to the point where everyone's bored now. So we looked at this, so we looked at how we meet the customer's need, how we meet this need of customers wanting to buy telephony solutions and wanting to use Janet to route telephony traffic. So we could have gone out and selected one preferred supplier and a framework style procurement. We could have selected 3 or 4 suppliers. But to be completely honest, these things exist at the moment. They're already there. So why would Janet get involved to do that? We would just work with a number of providers to make sure they were well connected to the network and step back and say, that's what Janet's doing in this area. But there was more of a need than that. So the 3 typical solutions that are out there, they didn't meet the need that we saw from the Janet community. So we went out and did a very, very long and arduous commercial RFI, where the telcos came back to us with the usual blurb of, yes, we can do various things. We can meet the need of your customers, and of course they're going to say that, but we actually were a little bit naughty in this, and we actually put in things like being able to deliver telephony over Janet without QoS, including things like free calls. If a customer buys a mobile and landline solution from a supplier, can they provide that free call element without an app on a phone, please? I don't want to be connected via Wi-Fi on an app using a different something. I just want to use my phone as my phone and not incur that cost. So the traditional telecoms providers came back and said, there's no way we can do that. The 2 things that you're looking for here, that need for doing it without QoS, or a separate IP connection, I'm going to touch on this later, or a separate IP connection provided by a telco to run that traffic over, And we certainly can't zero rate the bill element unless you buy our gold call package, which costs, 50, 60, 70 pounds a month. And then the calls are free, but they're not because you've already paid for them up front. So essentially the big telcos said no, but the new sort of telco market, the SIP providers, the likes of Gamma, Red Centric used to be in technology, and the new SIP reseller chain, they came back to us and said, yeah, of course we can do this. This is what we do. We're doing it already. We can put in bespoke call packages. We're able to do different things because we're now using different technology. Essentially, if we route our traffic over Janet, there's no cost of infrastructure for us because we're using something that's already there. So the customer wins because you're utilising existing infrastructure, and the provider wins because they're not having to put in pieces of copper excuse me, under the ground at a cost, or rent those from somebody else and then pass that on to you. So these new providers, the new business models, kind of came along and said, absolutely, we can do this. So Janet thought, well, we will progress in this area, and we created a dynamic purchasing service. Now, using this dynamic purchasing service, I'll talk about why it's different in a minute. You can buy anything relating to telephony via Janet. So it does have to be related to telephony, and it can be things like the PCI DSS solutions. It can be mobile handsets. It can be anything that touches on telephony. We haven't yet had requests to buy anything that we're not able to supply, but I'm sure that'll come along at some point. And the reason that the dynamic purchasing system, we chose this, is because suppliers can do that. They're not, they don't prescribe what they're going to sell. They don't have a load of lots on a shelf and they pull off pre-priced kits and pre-priced services for customers. It's a much more bespoke and dynamic thing. And we're actually the second dynamic purchasing system to be set up in the UK. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. There are now more, and Janet's done another DPS for selling other services. But at the time, there was only one other, and that was for taxi services in Portsmouth, and there weren't many parallels that we could draw with that. So we were kind of feeling our way in the dark a little bit here. So the dynamic element was key. That's something I'd like you to take away today. By using the DPS that we have installed, we pre-qualify suppliers. We have T's and C's with suppliers. They come to Janet, answer a whole host of questions. I'll touch on those. And they then join our service, and they, at that point, are OJEU compliant. So you can buy services from them in an OJEU compliant way. You don't have to go and do all of that stuff yourself. I know Henry touched on this in January, but I'm just reiterating it today. That can save you about 2 months because we've done the OJEU part for you. And we've also kindly asked the suppliers to meet various financial and technical requirements, and they must adhere to those before they come on board our purchasing service. If you don't want the things that we tell the suppliers you want, so there's about 15 points, if you don't want any of those, you can say to the supplier, we want to opt out of 0.4 or 0.5. We haven't had anyone do that yet, but you can. This is flexible enough for you to say, I don't want to have to receive free calls between landlines and mobiles, for example. So the value add between Janet in all of this, why Janet's getting involved, is that anything you buy through the framework, what you're going to be guaranteed is that suppliers are connected at 1 gig in 2 geographically separate locations. And what geographically separate doesn't mean, and this is a supplier who may or may not be on the Janet framework, they decided that geographically resilient connectivity was just 2 different servers, and it just happened that those 2 different servers were actually in the same rack, in the same colo, connected by the same piece of IP and the same DC power. So no, that isn't geographically resilient. Geographically resilient means, for example, Manchester and London, 2 different connection points in London, 2 different peerings around the UK at some point, and we're open to where we can connect the backbone up to commercial suppliers. We can do pretty much anywhere. Sometimes there's more cost associated with doing that, but Janet takes that cost on board because we're delivering a service to the community. So there's connectivity, there's a 0 rating of the call costs, and the suppliers won't try and sell you a separate IP connection to deliver your telephony traffic onto. So what the supply market wants to do, and certainly the traditional telcos, they want to take away your ISDN because that's expensive and old and needs replacing in some cases, and they want to give you a nice IP connection which they now route your SIP trunks over, or in some cases, and this is completely honest, they actually want to do SIP trunking over ISDN circuits, which is pretty bizarre, but there we are. That's certainly one way to ensure service assurance. very strange. What we're trying to say to suppliers is that the community may want to do that, and there may be cases, and you know, it may be that every single customer wants to do this. They want to have a separate IP connection. They don't want to be using their bog standard Janet connection to run their traffic onto, and they may need quality of service, and that's completely up to the customer and up to the supplier. But today, all we can work with is the backbone configuration we have, and at the moment that doesn't provide network quals, so things like DiffServ and whatever else. So we don't want the suppliers trying to sell you a separate IP connection, and we don't want you to enter into contract with them and then towards the end realise that, oh, we can't supply that service without quals, and you've wasted your time. So there are predefined things that we have done. Right, so this is where I'm Henry Hughes. So I'm leaping into the service assurance and quals angle here. We know there's been a lot of discussion about this within the Janet community. The people that discuss that, one of them isn't here today, unfortunately, which is a bit of a shame. But we understand that there is a requirement for service assurance on Janet. And when we say service assurance, let's be completely honest, and from a telephony perspective, that means quality of service on the IP infrastructure. It doesn't mean things like call quality and codecs and making sure that you get availability when you pick up the handset. When people talk about quality of service in a telephony context, most of the time it means on the IP infrastructure. So we have a number of connectivity products that can meet service assurance needs, and they at the moment in our product bag are things like wavelengths and dedicated research infrastructures. But at the moment, what we don't do on the Janet IP infrastructure on the backbone is we don't support quals. We also don't strip it or take it away or do anything with it. If the provider and the customer wants a quality of service assurance protocol to be switched on, they want end-to-end quals, we will just simply pass from the provider to the customer that quals marked traffic. We won't do anything with it, but we won't honour it. We won't give that precedence over other traffic at the moment. We have looked into this, and there's been a number of discussions for ages now. Since I started at Janet 15 years ago, we've been talking about how we do this, and we've looked into it a number of times. And my personal view, because I'm working in the area of telephony, we should just switch it on. It's got to be really easy. Come on, guys, just switch it on the network. The big telcos will come on board, connect to Janet, deliver services to our customers, and those customers who need quals will happily buy through our purchasing service the services that they want. But at the moment we don't have that situation, so where we are today is that we're listening. We are going to be at the EU CISA Quals event in January, where this is going to be discussed further, and there's network operations people there and the right quality of service people that will be there to discuss things, understand requirements and decide what we do. If you take a holistic approach, I mean, a question I would put back to the audience, but I don't necessarily want any answers on this right now. I mean, maybe we talk about it in the Q&A session. You know, is it right in the Janet community for us to prioritise traffic where a customer can afford or wants to use quality of service? Is it right that that service is provided to the detriment of others? So a user group, a customer who can't afford or deploy quals, do they get a worse service? And do we provide a better service to the customers who can? That kind of isn't the way the Janet community works at the moment. But, and there is a but here, you know, from a telephony perspective, it would make my life a hell of a lot easier if we could switch on quals, connect up the big suppliers, the likes of BT and whoever else, and deliver services to customers who also want quals and need quals. But we can't do that at the moment. I'm in discussions with BT at the moment about becoming a provider on the Janet purchasing service. But of course the sticking point is that we don't have an MPLS enabled network. But there's discussions now around how, without that, what would the customer journey be if there was a problem? How would BT and Janet and the customers engage with each other when there's a fault? Would BT have to pay out more in SLAs because there isn't quality of service? They feel that they would. They feel that there would be damage to their products and to their brand, and I can completely empathise with that. But at the moment, the way Janet works is that we don't have that quad switched on. And it may be that BT can change their business model, can change their technology model and do this, but we don't know. I'm working with Vodafone as well at the moment. And there's more likelihood that Vodafone will accept that. They'll accept that the world has sort of moved on in this area. And if they don't provide services over Janet this way, it may be that they start losing business. So I don't want to be arrogant enough and say that we're affecting the supply market, but it may be that case. Of course, slide finished, thankfully. Right. So the Janet value add continued. So what else do we offer as part of this purchasing service? We make sure that all suppliers do diligent pre-install testing and proactive monitoring. Absolutely key as part of any service. We don't want finger pointing in the wrong direction. You know, it's very easy for the three management domains, customer, Janet and supplier, to all just blame each other in this area. But ultimately the customer would still maybe not have a service, or they would be still having an issue. So all of the suppliers that come on board, if you want them to, will come along, put a special magic box on your network and make sure that it's able to carry the likely levels of telephony traffic you'll be running over your Janet connection over Janet. And also, you know, they're testing their own network. Is their own network, are their own servers, are they all suitable for carrying and dealing with their telephony traffic? And if they're not, then we look at how we can solve that problem. So before you sign a contract, the suppliers will come and do this if you want them to, and if there's a problem we can sort it out so you can move forward. The proactive monitoring is a bit more tricky because of three management domains, three different types of monitoring, but the suppliers have to be able to do this, and you know, whether that's just having a telephone cascade, whether it's having something on a layer on the network that does this, it doesn't matter. But as long as there is a way that the suppliers can proactively monitor the SIP connection, that's fine. At Janet, we also provide technical and procurement assistance. This is particularly relevant in the FE sector, in the FE community, who don't necessarily have loads of technical background, loads of procurement background. So they look to us to help them do things like build up a user requirements survey, develop a telephony strategy, develop a procurement strategy, write an ITT, all of that sort of stuff. And that's essentially what I do at the moment, so I help customers do that. We provide examples and case studies. So from I need a new phone system to I'm now buying one, Janet can handhold all of the way. Or, and I think this is probably very relevant in this room, we'll just back off and let you get on with what you're doing, and you can buy whatever you like and we'll leave you alone. But where you need that help, we're there. Where you don't, we'll back off. Again, going back to this halving of timescales, typically the procurement time, so the time to where you would actually start signing a contract, can be halved from about 4 to 2 months using our service. The way it works in a nutshell is that the 8 suppliers are registered via a portal. Janet, for each new customer that comes along and wants to use the service, issues what's called a simplified notice. That's a small couple of sentences of text outlining what the customer's looking to buy. That goes out onto the entire OJU journal, so the whole world sees this, and new suppliers can at that point come along and say, hey, we want to join the Janet service to be a supplier. And it gives our incumbent suppliers a chance to sharpen their pencils because they know what's coming around the corner. After 15 calendar days, so 15 calendar days including weekends, we would then launch an ITT. And the ITT you can build in to that timescales that suit you. So if you're just buying SIP trunks, you might want to say, hey, we'll give the suppliers a week to respond. We just want some 3 or 4 SIP trunks. We might look to buy more stuff later on. But at the moment, we just want a really simple thing. We might want 5 mobile handsets. That's all we want. We'll give them a couple of days to respond. But if you're buying an entire solution and you're going with minimal information, so you're going to the suppliers and saying, I am College X and I have 100 staff and I need a complete telecom solution, including mobiles and landlines. I want my evaluation criteria to be weighted 95% on price and 5% on technical. I don't care how it works, but it's got to be cheap. In that sort of scenario, give the suppliers 3 to 4 weeks to respond. Otherwise, the responses may not be as appropriate as you want them to be. So it's about working with suppliers and just kind of being sort of sensible in this area. So I've talked about how we're different. The dynamic element means that suppliers can come and go. They can sell you whatever they want, whatever you want. That was a Freudian slip there. They often do sell you whatever they want. They can come and go, so as new supplies and new technologies come along, new suppliers can come in and join our purchasing service, and if suppliers are on there who aren't doing much business or they've moved on, they can leave. So we don't have a typical framework environment where 5 suppliers come on board. You typically get a gold seller from manufacturer X that does all of the business, the other 4 do nothing. The theory of a framework-style mini marketplace is eroded because you've got one provider doing all of the business. In this area, you're sort of replicating standard market conditions a little bit more because there's this dynamic element in there. So all of the suppliers know that the others will respond. They will bid essentially on price and technical ability. They know that they're going to have to compete against the other suppliers on there, so they know that everyone will be hand-delivered ultimately business on a plate. And if they don't come back with the best prices or the best solution, they just won't win the business. And they know that it's a fair playing field. There isn't a gold provider in there who gets all the business. So, it's quite a nice way of doing things. So at the moment, as of yesterday, we added an 8th supplier on board. So in terms of the kind of tier 1 type telcos, we have Gamma, RedCentric and VoiceNet. They are physically directly connected to the Janet backbone at geographically separate locations, not in the same rack. And we have 5 other resellers. Now these 5 other organisations, Freedom Communications, Focus for You, Maintel, Demovo and Telecoms World, they are resellers of Gamma, but they are resellers of other solutions. So they're not just all the same. They just use Gamma for the interconnect and SIP elements. But for example, they may be a Vodafone MVNO, there may be an EE MVNO. So they all provide different things. Some are very strong in some areas and not so much in others. So, for example, if a very mobile-centric bid comes in, it may be that, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, that Maintel are very, very good at mobiles. So they would bid in for that mobile work. Or Freedom Communications might be really strong on SIP, so they would bid in for that work. So you end up with, capabilities shaping which supplier will respond. In most cases, all the suppliers will respond because we make sure that they're all able to, as a minimum, provide you with SIP trunking without clause, mobiles, and hosted PBX services. So as a minimum, all 3 are able to provide that. Example purchasing scenarios. So people wanting to save money by moving traffic onto Janet, they would look at SIP trunking. They want some flexibility over clearing, so they have a little agreement in place with a provider for 100 lines during the clearing period. Typically they would save around 50%. I know Coventry stated this morning that they saved about 42%. Typically it's in the region of 50% purely in that area. Another example might be customers wanting to reduce the call charges and the line rental, so they would look at buying SIP trunks and mobiles from the one provider. So they save 50% on their SIP trunks. They remove any call costs between any of those devices. So SIP to SIP or ISDN to ISDN, mobile to mobile, or any combination of the 3. There will be 0 rating in all the bills for any of those calls. In reality, the providers are going to be happy because they're getting line rental, they're getting mobile rental, and they're getting whatever else you buy. You might buy a handset, a bolt-on, whatever. You might buy hosted services, you might buy a piece of tin, a PBX to sit on site. Because they're getting all of their business, hey, let's squeeze them, let's make them pass on savings onto the customers. So they're happy that if they get all of the business, that they can reduce that cost, they can make that cost go away. Another example, this again is very much in the FE market, is hosted PBX. So taking the need to have tin locally on site, moving it all into the core of the network. So in some cases going to a CapEx, an OpEx from a CapEx model. So you just have a fixed price per user per month for mobile, for PBX services, for the line, for the handset and everything. This again reduces cost, but in all of these situations, because the cost is reduced, in reality, being completely honest, there are reasons why that cost is reduced. So in moving your telephony traffic onto your IP network, is there a problem there with redundancy in BCP? Putting your PBX into the core, not having the tin on site, you can't see the flashing lights, you can't do things yourself. It's hosted, but it's cheaper. So, you know, where there is a cost reduction, there are generally implications for that, but those implications are quite small, and they are reducing as new technology becomes more stable. An example of Pembrokeshire College, they came along, they were great, they just said we won't get rid of all our ISDN lines, we just want SIP trunks, we're going to buy mobiles, we want our BCP to be, the numbers of DDIs are rerouted from what would be our reception desk to 3 mobiles, that's our BCP solution, and they're happy, and they saved about 25k a year. What's coming next? So, there was discussion this morning about mobile hotspots, new buildings being Faraday cages, all that sort of stuff. We're looking at solutions, how we work with providers to put some solutions in this area. Is it going to be the Femto Pico infrastructure? We don't know. It might be that as the sort of fixed mobile convergence marketplace moves on, that there are other ways of doing things. Janet 4G to replace Janet 3G, please, and this is a plea back home, please include voice for Janet 4G and don't just have data on there. I think that's been something that there's a clear need for that. Mobile backhaul. So one of the problems with 4G is, yep, lovely, all of a provider's cells can work in a city with 4G, that's great. But in reality, the provider's backbones in most cases aren't big enough to meet all of the needs of 4G. If every customer was to turn on 4G, your experience isn't going to be anything like it is now. You know, the infrastructure isn't there. They're using a 3G-based backhaul network for 4G. So as we move along and as more customers come onto 4G, could the Janet community and Janet customers, could they benefit from using the Janet backbone to act as a route for those 4G mobile calls? We think possibly, and we're working with, we've done some very, very, very early work with EE on this, and it's something I'm going to take forward. Do we become a telco? We're way off from doing this, but I think as this market evolves, it will be that ISPs become telcos and vice versa. You know, it's there at the moment. BT's backbone 21CN is an IP backbone. VC, now a video conferencing service from a unified comms perspective. We support SIP, H323 and Link. So Link from a perspective of, if you have a Link client, you can register that with our service and talk to SIP and 323 users and any other Links users who are registered with that server. And we're looking at how we federate Link as well. So how we can act as a point to make unified comms break out from the local environment. So it's not just an enterprise tool, it's something that the Janet community can use amongst themselves. But there's this age-old thing of, the Janet community doesn't talk to each other that much, so any investment in there, in this area, would have to be, you know, the business case would have to stand up, so the investment would have to reap the benefits and would have to show why that collaboration is needed. I think it is, and I think it's getting cheaper and cheaper to do this, and why shouldn't we? Finally, looking back, you know, will the fact we've had 2 networks for this long seem like a strange thing? I think so. I think we're a way off. I think a lot of people are dipping their toe in the water at the moment. They're looking at things like SIP trunks for BCP and backup for some traffic. And as the SIP trunking proves itself, more SIP trunks are being bought then, and ISDN is being retired. Not many people are doing a big bang and just moving to SIP. It's a pretty bold thing to be doing. Janet's going to do that internally. We're eating our own dog food on this one, and we have actually bought via the purchasing service a completely hosted telephony solution, which isn't turned on yet. We've got an online briefing coming up, so a shameless plug here for that on the 4th of December, and it's me talking about moving to unified comms, dash an overview. Does anybody have any questions, or would you prefer to do this in the Q&A?
Yeah, thanks, Roger. I was about to say, those people